Great senator from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. President. This year marks 6 years since the President and Congress approved the North American U.S.-Mexico-Canadian Agreement, USMCA for short. It's also the year that the three countries will review the agreement and decide on its future. That 6-year review is part of the agreement itself, so it must be done. So I would like to review the USMCA's impact in the first 6 years. The agreement has really enhanced U.S. exports. So President Trump has hailed the trade deal as, quote, a colossal victory for Iowa farmers, ranchers, energy workers, factory workers, and American workers in all 50 states. End of President Trump's quotation. What President Trump said there is 100% on target when he made that statement about the value of the USMCA to the U.S. economy. Since 2019, U.S. agriculture exports have increased by almost $35 billion, and nearly half of that $35 billion was from just two countries, Canada and Mexico. After 10 years of relative stagnation before the agreement, the U.S. agriculture exports to Mexico shot up by $11 billion between 2019 and 2024 to over a total of $30 billion. Today, Mexico is the #1 market for U.S. corn, and around 1/3 of all U.S. agriculture exports go to either Canada and Mexico. And remember, I said Mexico, the #1 market for U.S. corn. Iowa, my state, is #1 producer of corn, so you know how that benefits the farmers of Iowa. Now, to summarize, the U.S. agriculture exports pie has gotten bigger, and the biggest slices have been for Canada and Mexico because of the USMCA. This means bringing home more bacon for Iowa farmers. And when I mention bacon, Iowa is also the #1 pork producer of the 50 states. So what I've just said to you is why it's necessary to continue the great economic environment that the USMCA has produced for the United States. In other words, it's a no-brainer to get the USMCA extended and get it done very, very soon. President Trump needs to speak forcefully about the success of the USMCA along the same lines of the quote that I gave you earlier in my speech. We know it's his strong position. It should be easy to restate that to everybody. His positive words will take the uncertainty out of whether this agreement will be extended, and if it's not extended, the great economic loss to the United States. Uncertainty doesn't help anybody's economy. Such uncertainty is holding back our economic growth. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Leader.
Mr. President, we have 1 week and 1 day left to pass the Department of Homeland Security appropriations bill. Democrats demanded a tight timeline for the DHS continuing resolution. Republicans warned Democrats repeatedly that such a short timeline would be challenging, if not impossible. But to prevent Democrats from shutting down a big part of the government and denying paychecks to soldiers and federal workers, we ultimately gave it to them. Now, the onus is on Democrats to negotiate in good faith and reach an agreement quickly. Notice I said negotiate, Mr. President. This is not a blank check situation where Republicans just to agree to a list of Democrat demands. Democrats had previously agreed to a Homeland Security appropriations bill which included additional money for body cameras as well as de-escalation training for immigration and customs enforcement officers, and additional oversight, I should say, of funds that have already been appropriated to DHS. Those are all things that were agreed upon when that bill was initially negotiated and supported by Democrats in the House and the Senate. Well, now, Mr. President, they've reopened negotiations, and that means taking up ideas and priorities from both sides. We need to have a serious discussion about the climate of harassment and worse that law enforcement officers have been facing for simply trying to do their jobs. We also need to address the issue of cooperation between local and federal law enforcement. Too many jurisdictions prohibit local law enforcement from cooperating with immigration and customs enforcement, a situation that makes things more dangerous for everyone. The President's border czar, Tom Homan, yesterday announced that the Department of Homeland Security will be withdrawing 700 federal agents from Minnesota, in large part because of increased cooperation from local law enforcement. So I hope my Democrat colleagues are ready to have some conversations with the White House about these and other issues. The White House has demonstrated that it's taking things seriously, and it has already resulted in body cams for all officers deployed to Minneapolis and, as I said, the drawdown of federal agents thanks to the increased cooperation from local law enforcement that Tom Homan has facilitated. I want to see my Democrat colleagues take things seriously as well. Mr. President, I'd also like to remind Democrats that they are putting funding for some critical government agencies in jeopardy. TSA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Coast Guard, the Secret Service, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center are all funded by the DHS appropriations bill. I think all Americans remember the travel disaster Democrats created by shutting down the government for 43 days last fall. So Democrats failed to agree to a DHS funding bill and shut down the TSA. As a result, there's a very good chance we could see more travel problems. I'd also like to remind my Democrat colleagues that the only way to get any reforms at ICE is to agree to a bill. A CR would not include any of the reforms already included, as I said earlier, in the DHS bill, which they helped negotiate and supported before they changed their mind and didn't support it. And a CR certainly wouldn't include any new reforms. The Democrat leader was complaining about the announcement about body cams for federal officers in Minneapolis, asking why it wasn't for the whole country. Well, Mr. President, I'd like to remind him that the DHS bill we negotiated already includes money for additional body cameras, somewhere on the order of $20 million for additional body cameras. The Democrat leader also complained that he doesn't trust the administration's reforms and that we need a law. Well, getting a law is well within Democrats' power. But again, Democrats have to be willing to actually reach an agreement. If they're coming to the table demanding a blank check or refusing to consider any measures but their own, they're likely to end up with nothing, which is fine if Democrats just want a political issue. But if they actually want to do something, then again, they're going to have to be willing to reach agreement with the White House on a final bill. 1 week and 1 day more, Mr. President. That is the timeline that the Democrats demanded, and I say demanded, and actually got. They were granted. After having negotiated a 6-bill package, which included the DHS appropriations bill, they decided, no, we're not going to do that. People want to blame the White House. They want to blame Republicans. Republicans had nothing to do with that. It passed the House, the 6-bill package, including the DHS appropriations bill, with 341 votes in the U.S. House of Representatives. Almost 80% of the entire House had cleared the DHS appropriations bill that was included in the package that the Senate was going to vote on that the House had already passed. And then it came over here, and the Democrats decided to blow it up. All of a sudden, the bill that they helped negotiate and write and be a part of, which included all the reforms that I mentioned, de-escalation training, body cameras, all those things were included in the bill that they said they didn't then want to pass. So they wanted a separate discussion about those issues and demanded that if we didn't give them that, they weren't going to vote for the package. And so they got what they wanted. And then we had a debate about how long should the CR go for to allow the sides to come together behind an agreement. And I suggested, Mr. President, our side suggested that perhaps 6 weeks would be a sufficient amount of time to have an earnest negotiation with all the parties at the table, and then time to execute actually passing whatever is agreed upon across the floor of the House and the Senate and getting on the President's desk. The Democrats demanded a 2-week CR, or they wouldn't vote for the package. And so they got what they wanted, which is a 2-week continuing resolution to fund the Department of Homeland Security and the other things I mentioned, FEMA, TSA, Coast Guard, all those things, for 2 weeks. And yet they haven't appeared yet to want to negotiate on all the things that they're demanding. They put out a list of demands yesterday. Our team, our folks, have tried to get with them to sit down at the table and with the White House to reach an agreement that would enable the Department of Homeland Security appropriations bill to actually be passed here in the Senate and the House and sent to the President. But that is not right now even in the realm of possibility, Mr. President, because they're not engaging. We've got a now 1 week and 1 day time frame in which to do this, which is entirely unrealistic. And a Democrat Party in both the House and the Senate, which seems a lot less interested in getting a solution to this than they do in having a political issue. Well, Mr. President, if for some reason the Department of Homeland Security ends up in a shutdown, it is going to be totally on them. They will own it. We have tried repeatedly. They have agreed repeatedly before they decided not to agree and to demand something else, which they also got. But as of right now, we aren't anywhere close to having any sort of an agreement that would enable us to fund the Department of Homeland Security. And so, Mr. President, I would hope that the Democrats will come to the table. The timeline that they asked for has been granted, and I hope that they are finally ready to get this done. It's important for the American people. All these agencies, Federal Emergency Management Agency, which oversees disasters in this country. We've got a number of weather-related disasters in this country that are going to require the able attention of FEMA. A lot of important agencies, Mr. President, that won't go funded if they remain in this posture of resisting anything that doesn't give them all of their demands. But worse yet, Mr. President, not only insisting on all the demands, most of which are, as they know, very unrealistic and unserious, but perhaps even more important than that, at least as of right now, not even willing to engage in a negotiation and discussion to try and reach a result. Mr. President, I hope that changes. I want to get this done. We want to get this done. I hope that there are Democrats who also want to get this done, and I know the President of the United States is prepared to sign a bill once these negotiations get underway and we reach an agreement. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Democrat leader.
Mr. President, for months, Americans have watched in horror as ICE agents have stopped acting like law enforcement and started terrorizing communities across the country. In cities like Minneapolis, Chicago, Phoenix, and elsewhere, federal agents have been running around with no identification, barging into homes without warrants, arresting people without due process, using force in ways that violate people's constitutional rights. On 2 occasions, American citizens were executed in broad daylight. No other police department in America, no city police, no sheriffs, no state police, or until recently, no federal police, would tolerate this kind of unrestrained barbarity. The American people are reacting. They're appalled. The data shows that overwhelmingly, even Republicans, non-MAGA Republicans in particular, are really upset about these violations of rights. They look at the pictures on TV and they say, this is not America. This is not America. Well, Donald Trump is realizing that Americans are turning against him on this issue. And it's not an immigration issue, it's a public safety issue. And the Republicans are on the wrong side of public safety right now. In fact, they're defending using tax dollars to create chaos in our cities instead of using those dollars to reduce costs of health care. Well, Donald Trump is getting it. He called me last week because he didn't want to have the 6 bills tied together. He knew Homeland Security was much more of a problem. And yesterday, in an interview, Trump said, quote, maybe we can use a little bit of a softer touch when it comes to ISIS tactics. Well, President Trump, if you want a softer touch, then the right answer is to lean on Republican leaders in Congress to pass the proposals Democrats have put together. Frankly, Republican leaders can't get it done without you, President Trump, because they're too scared and too gripped by the extreme right to do anything without your backing. Their immediate rejection of the Democrats' reasonable, common-sense proposals was totally predictable because the Republican leaders don't want ICE to have any accountability, totally adverse to what Americans believe and want. Passing legislation along the lines that Democrats have proposed is the right thing to do. Americans already support our ideas. They're not extreme. They mirror the same standards that law enforcement around the country already follows. The change, of course, will require legislation, or the public won't buy it. And legislation will require Donald Trump to push the Republicans into action. Leader Jeffries and I are ready to negotiate. Yesterday, we formally shared our specific demands with Republican leadership about what must happen to rein in ICE and stop the violence. And Democrats in the House and Senate are on the same exact page about what needs to be done to rein in ICE, end the violence. What must we do? We must see the end of roving patrols. People can't just be picked up on the street and thrown into some dark place with no explanation as to why, with no warrant. You can't barge into someone's home without a warrant. That's what we're saying. We need reasonable use of force policies, like states do. Every state has good rules for their police, for their sheriffs. Why should ICE be the only exception? Why should they be allowed to continue to terrorize our cities? And of course, we must have no secret police with masks off and cameras on. Speaker Johnson, he says that's wrong. Why? Explain it. Every local community, I'm sure the communities down in Louisiana, the sheriffs and state police have full identification of police officers. Yes, there's a problem with doxing, and that can easily be dealt with in the rare moment it has. That doesn't require all masks stay on. Everyone knows that. These are just excuses because they're afraid of the right wing who believe in this horrible stuff. We also make clear that certain places, like schools and churches and election places, should be off limits. We make it clear that American citizens cannot be arrested and detained without due process. Republicans, Thune, Leader Johnson, explain why you think it's okay for American citizens to be arrested and detained without any due process. Explain it. Just like you got to explain why you want to keep the masks on. Just like you want to explain why people can be arrested without warrants. Explain it. Why? But instead, just a quick, immediate dismissal because you're afraid to negotiate. Our demands are not crazy demands. It's the kind of stuff that applies to police departments everywhere. We're not going out on a limb saying federal officers should have identification. We know what we're talking about when we say that the Fourth Amendment, which protects against unreasonable search and seizure, should be obeyed. This is middle school civics class stuff we're dealing with here. So I'm just astounded to hear Republicans like Johnson and Republican senators, some of them, say our proposals are somehow political or non-starters. Political? Republicans think it's political and non-starters to say police should identify themselves? Explain that to America. It's not political, it's the Constitution, and it's the moral and right thing to do in a democratic country. It's about people's basic rights. It's about people's safety. If Republicans don't like our proposals, pouting is not going to make the chaos in the streets go away. The Republicans need to explain why to the American people. Let me say it again. If Republicans don't like our proposals, pouting is not enough. They need to explain why to the American people, because they don't have a good explanation. They're just afraid of the right wing, some of those crazies on the right who actually do want to rip up the Constitution. The truth is, Republicans cannot explain why our ideas are extreme, because they know deep down that what ICE is doing is indefensible, so they're stuck. If Republicans think it's political or extreme to say ICE agents ought to identify themselves, again, explain why to the American people. Johnson, explain why it's okay to do it in Louisiana, but it's not okay to do it here to have police identify themselves. If Republicans think it's political or extreme to say it's wrong for ICE agents to raid churches and schools and hospitals, oftentimes with no warrant and no cooperation with local police, they should explain why. If Republicans think the status quo with ICE is okay, they should back it up and say so to the American people. Now, most Americans, we Democrats, support law enforcement. We support our police. They have hard jobs. They put their lives on the line every day to keep us safe. But Americans don't support are the kind of abuses ICE is committing with impunity across communities. And police officers don't like it either. It gives them a bad name. ICE's behavior is not law enforcement, it's thuggery. ICE's behavior is not law enforcement, it's thuggery. It puts people in danger. President Trump knows things have to change. He should lean on Republicans in Congress to work with Democrats and deliver. This is a gut check moment for Congress. Americans expect nothing short of real, meaningful, common sense legislation. Americans expect us to rein in ICE and end the violence, which we can do right here, if only the Republicans cooperate and do the right thing. I yield the floor.
Call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Republican Whip.
I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the Olson nomination.
Without objection.
Mr. President, last night the minority leader came out with a new list of demands designed to protect illegal immigrant criminals. We just heard him speak about it on the floor just a few minutes ago. The minority leader has said that he has 10 demands. Last week he had 3. Now he says he has 10. I read the fine print. It looks to me that this ballooning list is now up to 23 demands. The minority leader just said Republicans are calling the demands political. Well, I see them as radical and extreme. This is about funding the Department of Homeland Security for our nation, keeping our nation safe. The minority leader said Republicans can't explain why their demands are extreme. Well, I'll tell you why they're extreme, because they prioritize the safety of illegal immigrant criminals over the safety and security of the American people. And I would think a majority of Americans would see that as extreme and dangerous. Now, the minority leader might think that he has leverage to defund law enforcement. He's wrong. Border Patrol is funded. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is funded. To me, what is reckless here from this far left wish list is it's closing the Federal Emergency Management Agency, closing them down. Coast Guard working without pay. TSA agents working without pay. Making our nation more vulnerable to cyber attacks. Those are all things that are funded by the Department of Homeland Security. So that's why I tell you that these demands are radical. It is the demand to change the rules regarding immigration enforcement warrants. And that's a big part of what they're talking about. When Democrats say they want to, quote, improve warrant procedures and standards, sounds nice. I'm not a lawyer. You study it, you look into it, because you hear the Democrats use that phrase a lot. What Democrats won't tell you is the people that benefit from that are criminals. Here's what this Democrat demand actually does. I'll tell you because Senator Schumer refuses to tell us what it does. It ends immigration enforcement. Ends it. If Immigration and Customs Enforcement is forced to use what are called judicial warrants for each and every immigration arrest, America will become a sanctuary country. Not just a bunch of sanctuary cities in 13 different states. No, an entire sanctuary country. That's what they are pushing for. And that is their goal, and it is a destructive goal for our nation. Democrats want to abolish ICE. You've seen them, the signs being carried in the streets. They want to abolish borders. They want to turn America into a sanctuary country for illegal immigrants, and specifically for illegal immigrant criminals who Joe Biden let flush into this country all the way through 4 years, 10,000 a day illegal immigrants coming into the nation. Democrats had their way. Removing illegal immigrants from our communities, from our streets, would be nearly impossible. Today, more than 1 million illegal immigrants have received from the courts a final court order for removal. Democrats want every single one of them to stay in our communities, to stay on our streets and in our neighborhoods all across the country forever. If you have a final removal order, you have already gone before an immigration judge, you presented your case, you've received due process, you exhausted every possible appeal. After a fair and thorough process, a judge has affirmed you may not stay in this country any longer. Finished. It is time for you to go. It's the law. Federal immigration officials have used administrative warrants for decades. Federal law provides for them. The Supreme Court upheld their constitutionality in 1960. We're talking 65 years ago. Federal circuit courts have reaffirmed their use in decade after decade after decade. Senate Democrats want to overturn long-term constitutional precedent. Why? Because Democrats seek to dismantle immigration enforcement completely. The Democrat demand is not a minor adjustment. If Democrats have their way, it would lead to fewer arrests, fewer removals, lead to more illegal immigrant criminals released onto the streets in our communities and into our neighborhoods. That's what this is about. The Senate should be very clear-eyed about the Democrats' goals and the dangerous consequences of the demands that are being made by Senator Schumer and the Democrats just to fund the Department of Homeland Security, something that we've agreed to do in the weeks prior to their decision a week ago to just say no. They said, nope, we're done. Joe Biden and the Democrats spent 4 years ignoring our nation's immigration laws. They are the party of wide open borders. They have been. They've proven it. They brought back catch and release. They abused parole powers, and they demonized law enforcement. They demonized the very men and women who devote their lives and commit their careers to keeping our nation safe. As a result, 10 million illegal immigrants flooded into the country. Our communities became less safe because Democrats refused to enforce the law. In Georgia, Laken Riley, a 22-year-old nursing student, she was murdered by an illegal immigrant. Her killer crossed into this country illegally in 2022. The Biden administration released that killer into our country instead of removing him. Before he killed Laken Riley, he was arrested in New York City for child endangerment. Somebody arrested in New York City for endangering a child, despite his crime. What happens in New York City? He was released. Why? Because New York City is a sanctuary city, and now the governor there wants to make it a sanctuary state. Had her killer been in custody, Laken Riley would still be alive today. She would have finished her nursing training and be taking care of patients in her community. In North Carolina, 2 teenagers were killed by an illegal immigrant in a deadly car crash. The killer was driving drunk. His criminal record before the incident was lengthy criminal record. Yet before the crash, his other charges were dismissed by sanctuary cities. North Carolina's legislature passed multiple bills to require local police to get illegal immigrant criminals off the streets. So what happened? Well, North Carolina's pro-crime Democrat governor named Roy Cooper vetoed them all. So criminals are back on the streets thanks to a North Carolina pro-crime Democrat governor named Roy Cooper. 3 vetoes by Roy Cooper, Democrat governor of North Carolina, allowing illegal immigrant criminals to roam freely. And because of Governor Cooper's reckless vetoes, parents had to bury their teenage children. Mr. President, tragedies like this remind us that we all pay the price when liberal politicians favor illegal immigrant criminals over the safety of American citizens. That's exactly why Republicans passed the Laken Riley Act. Because of that law, the Department of Homeland Security has detained an additional 20,000 illegal immigrants who otherwise would have been released back into our communities. When it comes to public safety, Democrats continue to fail the American people. Now, Senate Republicans will not accept changes that make our communities less safe. And when I read Senator Schumer's list of the 23 demands, he may call it 10, it started as 3. These are things that will make our communities less safe. Republicans are going to continue to stand on the side of safer and more secure communities. Now, Mr. President, on a separate matter. Mr. President, tomorrow in Milan, Italy, the 2026 Winter Olympics officially begins. Wyoming is once again helping lead Team USA to the top of the mountain, literally. 3 extraordinary Wyoming women are competing on the world's biggest stage. They're Jalen Koff, Breezy Johnson, and Anna Gibson. Now, Jalen Koff is from Alta, Wyoming, and she's competing in her 3rd Olympic Games. Skiing runs in her family. Both of her parents were professional mogul skiers. And Wyoming was thrilled, but not at all surprised, when she took home the silver medal at the 2022 Games. This year, she's going for gold, and she's competing in the single and dual moguls, which is a new Olympic sport making its debut this year. Breezy Johnson of Jackson Hole, Wyoming, is competing in her 2nd Winter Olympics. The 2026 Olympics marks Breezy's return to alpine skiing. She had to withdraw from the 2022 Games after tearing her anterior cruciate ligament and meniscus. Known for her speed, she embodies the relentless drive of a champion and the ability to overcome adversity. Anna Gibson from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, will compete in ski mountaineering. Both Anna and ski mountaineering are making their Olympic debuts. In this event, athletes ski up a steep mountain before skiing back down the mountain. It is a grueling test of strength, endurance, and willpower. As a decorated cross-country runner, going to get her up the mountain, and Nordic skier, which will get her down the mountain, Anna is made for this challenge. My home state of Wyoming will be cheering on each and every one of these 3 incredible women, and will be watching them with pride. Few athletes ever know the honor of representing Team USA. Fewer still will be able to stand on the Olympic podium when the Star-Spangled Banner plays. These 3 Wyoming women are part of a very elite group. They remind us of the greatness and that comes from the courage and from determination and from the willingness to chase something extraordinary. And I know, Mr. President, all of America wishes the very, very best for Team USA in the days and weeks ahead. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.
Senator from Iowa.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to honor a fellow Iowan and an exemplary leader, General James J. Mingus. Upon his retirement from the United States Army after more than 4 decades of distinguished service to our nation. Born in Spencer, Iowa, General Mingus was instilled with strong Midwestern values of hard work, service, grit, and teamwork. Long before he wore 4 stars on his shoulders, General Mingus took up the call to service in 1981 in the same way that so many of us did. He enlisted in the Iowa Army National Guard. It was there that he learned the mundane tasks of a young soldier at that time: shining black leather boots, making sure your uniform was ready for those weekend drills in a blustery, cold Iowa. But he also learned the more impactful lessons in the National Guard, such as leadership and teamwork and caring for the brother to the left and right of you. His focus, even as a young soldier, was always on people. In 1985, he earned his commission in field artillery at Winona State University Reserve Officer Training Corps. When he entered active duty 2 years later, he transitioned to the infantry. From the outset, General Mingus's trajectory took him through some of the Army's most demanding assignments. He commanded and served in positions that required courage, initiative, and an unwavering sense of duty. Those early assignments prepared him for service in the 75th Ranger Regiment, where he served as an operations officer and later commanded the 4th Ranger Training Battalion, helping shape the Army's toughest trainees into elite warriors. Throughout his career, General Mingus was repeatedly entrusted with greater responsibility. This was a reflection of the confidence placed in him by soldiers and senior leaders alike. Over the course of his career, General Mingus deployed not once, not twice, nope, not 5 times, not even 10. General Mingus deployed 12 times to Iraq and Afghanistan, repeatedly placing himself along soldiers in harm's way and earning the enduring respect of those that he led. He went on to serve in key staff roles at United States Central Command and the Joint Special Operations Command, where his strategic insight helped guide complex and high-risk missions. In August 2018, General Mingus assumed command of the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg, one of the Army's most storied divisions. Through these experiences, and a testament to his dedication and leadership, he was selected to serve as the 39th Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Army and promoted to the rank of 4-star general. In that role, he has served as the Army's 2nd highest ranking officer, helping to oversee the readiness, modernization, and the strategic direction of our nation's land forces. But beyond rank and assignments, those who have served under him will tell you that General Mingus's greatest legacy is his focus on people, on soldiers and their families, on mentorship, and on ensuring that the Army remains lethal, ready, and grounded in its core values. His journey from an enlisted Iowa Army National Guardsman to Vice Chief of Staff of the Army is a powerful example for every young man or woman of how great our American opportunity is. On behalf of a grateful nation, I extend my deepest thanks to General James J. Mingus for his extraordinary service and sacrifice. I also have profound appreciation for his wife, Amy, who has such a tremendous and beautiful spirit, and their family, whose support made this remarkable career possible. As he moves into his next chapter, his legacy will endure in the strength of the United States Army and the countless soldiers who are better leaders and better Americans because they served alongside him and under him. God bless you, General James J. Mingus, and thank you for your service and sacrifice to our great United States Army and to our great United States of America. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
An order, Leader.
Mr. President, 2 months ago, nearly every single member of the House and Senate voted to pass a very simple bill with a very simple message: release the Epstein files. The legal deadline to release the files was December the 19th, nearly 50 days ago, and the American people are still waiting for the truth to come out. The December 19th deadline was not a recommendation. It wasn't a suggestion. Releasing the Epstein files is the law, a law that every single member of this chamber, Democrat, Republican, Independent, supported, as well as every member of the House, save one. So where are we today? 50 days past the deadline. At best, according to the Department of Justice's own admissions, maybe half of all the available Epstein files have been released. That means millions of documents, which contain the names of conspirators, financial records, travel logs, letters, emails. The public deserves to see that documents, the heinous crimes of Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators, remain shrouded in darkness. These are things the public deserves to see, and they're shrouded in darkness. And whatever materials have been released have often been redacted to an absurd degree. Hundreds of pages have been blotted out to the point that it's just a wall of black ink. That's it. A wall of black ink. Look at this. There are hundreds of pages that look just like this. This is not transparency. This is not what the law requires. This is a mockery of the truth and an insult to the survivors. What makes this all the more sickening is that in over 1,000 instances, the Justice Department failed to follow the law and leaked the identities of over 100 victims. But do you know who the Justice Department did seem to protect? Epstein's co-conspirators. You know who else the Justice Department seemed to protect? Donald Trump. What is Pam Bondi trying to hide? Enough is enough. Today I come to the floor to seek unanimous passage of a resolution directing the Senate to sue the Trump administration for violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act. 15 of my Democratic colleagues have joined in co-sponsoring this resolution, and I thank every single one of them for standing firm. I urge my Republican colleagues not to stand in the way today. It's the height of absurdity for Republicans to have supported the Epstein Files Transparency Act, but then go ahead and object to enforcing it. What hypocrisy. Objecting today would completely cancel out the whole point of Republicans supporting the law in the first place. And finally, the people who have lost the most, who have suffered the most, are Jeffrey Epstein's victims. With me, I have a letter from about 20 of the victims explaining how reckless and dangerous it was for DOJ to carelessly release victims' information while going to great lengths to redact the names of co-conspirators. So I ask unanimous consent that this letter from Jeffrey Epstein survivors detailing the grave harms of the DOJ's careless release of victims' identities be entered in the congressional record.
Without objection.
Enough is enough. Congress spoke with one voice when it passed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. The deadline is long past, and the Trump Justice Department is still breaking the law. Senate Democrats are exhausting every possible avenue to force the administration to do what it's already legally required to do: release the complete files, deliver transparency and justice finally to Epstein's victims. If the administration will not follow the law, which it isn't, the Senate must act. No one, not even the president, is above the law. The question before the Senate Republicans today is simple. Will they enforce the law that they helped pass, or object and help keep the Epstein files hidden? as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of S-Res 597, that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President,
Majority Whip.
reserving the right to object, this is another reckless political stunt designed to distract Americans from Democrats' dangerous plan to shut down the Department of Homeland Security. Now, that's a move that's, number one, going to delay Federal Emergency Management Agency preparedness the country needs right now. Number two, it's going to disrupt air travel. Number three, it's going to degrade the Coast Guard's ability to interdict deadly drugs. And number four, it's going to make us more vulnerable to cyber attacks. And therefore, Mr. President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President,
Senator of Oregon.
I compliment the Minority Leader for coming forth and saying what the Senate has agreed to do, which is to force the Epstein files to be released, must be backed up by the force of law. Because we know that the administration failed to release half of the paperwork, some 3 million pages. We know that they blocked out whole pages in order to disguise, apparently, the protection of powerful men that they don't want drawn into this discussion. And then they proceeded to not redact the names of victims, as the law required. Let us not forget what this entire Epstein scandal is about. It's about powerful, wealthy men grooming, abusing, and raping young women and men. That's what it's about. I cannot understand for the life of me why the Republican leadership just objected for us to seek enforcement of the law that we passed unanimously here. Why is the Republican leadership protecting powerful men? Why are they protecting the administration, allowing 3 million pages to be held onto? Why are they allowing page after page after page to be blacked out to protect those powerful men? Why will they not respond to the fact that when these files were released, they did exactly the opposite of the law and failed to redact information about victims, re-victimizing so many? This is 1,000% unacceptable, and it's unacceptable to our values as a nation, our values which talk about equal justice under law. That's why, by unanimous consent, we said those files must be released. But it's meaningless if the administration simply chooses not to comply, and then my Republican leadership colleagues proceed to block the ability to enforce what the Senate agreed to pursue: accountability, justice for the victims, transparency over this horrific scandal. Mr. President, I hope my Republican colleagues will reconsider their objection, because what they've just done is wrong, morally wrong, and wrong under the values of equal justice under law, wrong under the values of justice for those who have been victimized, wrong under the value of accountability for the perpetrators. Thank you.
Senator of Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak for up to 15 minutes prior to the scheduled roll call vote.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, I'd like to talk about a topic that may seem irrelevant to the average person at first glance, but actually affects all of us a great deal more than we might imagine. A tiny but vicious parasite known as the New World screwworm is infecting cattle across Mexico, and it's getting closer and closer to the United States by the minute. Of course, many know that Texas ranks among the actually first in the nation for cattle production. We proudly represent nearly 15% of total cattle production in the United States, generating more than $11 billion in cash receipts. So the Texas cattle industry is obviously very concerned about the spread of the New World screwworm. This parasite lays its eggs in the wounds of warm-blooded animals, particularly livestock. The larva burrows into the openings, creating infections that, left untreated, can cause animals to die within 1 week. We do not have vaccinations, unfortunately, to prevent screwworm infections, so outbreaks in cattle herds require labor-intensive daily inspections of livestock to make sure they've not been infested. Now, some may be wondering, that sounds pretty horrific, but what does it have to do with me? Well, the truth is, this little pest, this vicious pest, touches all of our lives one way or the other. If the New World screwworm spreads to Texas, infecting cattle and killing livestock, the already high price of beef will continue to increase. And of course, as we're all focused on kitchen table issues and affordability, that's the last thing we need. That means that anyone who enjoys a steak or hamburger will be staring at higher prices in their local restaurant or at the drive-thru at their favorite fast food chain or at the grocery store. Anyone planning a nice Valentine's Day dinner in a few weeks should listen up and perhaps budget accordingly. Unfortunately, the New World screwworm is quickly spreading. In 2023, since 2023, there have been outbreaks of this deadly insect in Panama, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, El Salvador, and Costa Rica. Costa Rica declared the New World screwworm a national emergency in 2024. That same year, the fly made its way to Mexico, which, of course, given our proximity to Mexico, has raised concerns among Texas cattle ranchers that it may soon make its way across the border and lead to an outbreak in our state, and not stop there. At the end of last year, a case of New World screwworm was reported less than 400 miles south of the U.S.-Mexico border. Fortunately, President Trump and U.S. Department of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins, has made defeating the New World screwworm a priority. Our federal government's response to this threat spans multiple avenues, including emergency response planning, sterile fly production and dispersal efforts, as well as targeted initiatives at surveillance and research. I've been working closely with the USDA and other stakeholders to promote these efforts, and I've introduced legislation to authorize funding to deal with these measures. First of all, the USDA is partnering with state and local governments to ensure that the United States is prepared for a potential outbreak. This means working across federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial agencies to update emergency response plans, including or ensuring that responders are trained and ready. They are also supporting hands-on training and simulations at all levels of government to practice rapid, coordinated responses in the event of an outbreak. And they're ensuring that we have effective treatments available for both animals and humans so that veterinarians and healthcare professionals can act quickly if necessary. This parasite doesn't just affect cattle, it affects human beings too, and it's a horrific, horrific thing. Secondly, USDA is investing significantly in the renovation and construction of new sterile fly facilities in both the United States and Mexico to stop the screwworm. We know that the use of sterile flies was effective during the last outbreak of the New World screwworm in North America, which happened in the 1960s. The sterile male fly mates with female flies who only once during their lifetime. And so by releasing large number of sterile male flies, the population can be stopped in its tracks. This approach worked to eradicate these deadly infestations in the 60s, and I'm hopeful it will work again, and I'm confident it will once implemented now in the 2020s. The USDA is investing $21 million to help renovate and convert an existing fruit fly facility in Metapa, Mexico. Once complete, this facility is expected to produce an additional 60 to 100 million sterile flies per week. With continued support from technical experts at USDA, Mexico expects production to begin as early as the summer of 2026. Last November, the USDA opened a sterile fly dispersal facility in Tampico, Mexico. This facility allows USDA to disperse sterile flies aerially across northeastern Mexico, including Nuevo León. In addition to revamping and developing facilities in Mexico, the USDA is also working to ensure that we have a sterile fly facility here in the United States. Planning is currently underway with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to construct a domestic sterile fly production facility in South Texas. This facility has a projected capacity of 300 million sterile flies per week. It will be the only U.S.-based sterile fly production facility and will work in tandem with facilities in Panama and Mexico to help eradicate this pest and protect American agriculture. But Secretary Rollins' efforts haven't stopped there. The USDA is also investing in surveillance capabilities to try to monitor the spread, as well as research to identify new solutions. The USDA has deployed over 100 traps and lures across high-risk areas in the border states and is leveraging thousands of insect traps all along the southern border. Tens of thousands of flies from traps in all locations have been submitted to our National Veterinary Services laboratories for identification, thankfully with zero new world screwworm detection so far. In Texas, the USDA examines all wildlife for signs of infection. To date, more than 6,600 wild animals across 28 species have been examined. Here again, thankfully, with no evidence of new world screwworm found. Finally, USDA has announced the new World Screwworm Grand Challenge, which will prevent the pest's northward spread and safeguard America's food supply by investing in projects that enhance sterile fly production, develop new traps and lures, and develop increased understanding of potential treatments that could be stockpiled and used here in the United States if necessary. So while the new world screwworm poses a direct threat to cattle ranchers, all of us who enjoy a good hamburger or a steak, I think this should be encouraging news. So the fly has yet to land here in the United States, but it's close, and we're taking active steps to prevent its continued northward spread. I'm confident that under Secretary Rollins and President Trump's leadership, we will be prepared to meet this nasty parasite if it arrives in the United States. Texas cattle ranchers and beef lovers alike can rest assured knowing that this Secretary Rollins and President Trump and the United States Congress are on the job. Mr. President, I yield the floor.